Hi, I'm Chad from Chad DIY, and today we're building this huge workbench. It's got a solid oak top, it's got a 2-inch metal frame with built-in tool chests, 2 of them. Can't even show you the whole thing on camera, it's too long. So it turned out awesome, I'm super excited about it, so let's get started. The first step is to cut everything out on the metal chop saw. I'm using 11 gauge 2-inch tubing and 11 gauge 2-inch angle. Once I have all my metal pieces cut, I can start grinding the edges smooth. I'm just using a bench grinder for this process, but you also could use an angle grinder too. As you can see, I have all my pieces laid out and I'm just going to start grinding them one at a time. Next, I can move on to start tacking all the pieces in place. I'm just using a magnetic square to keep everything in place. I'll continue to work around the piece, just doing 1 or 2 spot welds on each. As you can see with this layout, I'm using the 2-inch tubing for the top rail and then the 3 supporting rails. Once I have one section done, it's pretty easy to replicate the next ones. I'll start placing all the pieces on top of the original frame and clamping them down. Once everything's clamped in place matching the original frame, I can start spot welding everything together. I can now start working on the horizontal supports, which are currently in the vertical position. The magnetic squares do a pretty good job of holding everything square, but I also like to double check it. Now that I have one section with all the supports in place, I can set the other section on top of it. To weld both sections together, I did need some clamps just to hold everything square. Now that everything is tack welded, I can go and run the full beads to secure everything in place. This ended up being a little bit more welding than I anticipated, but everything turned out pretty well. Next, I can bring it outside and start degreasing everything and cleaning it up to get ready for paint. I'm just using cans of spray paint from Rust-Oleum. The color I chose is flat black. I think this color is going to be perfect because you can't really tell when it gets scuffed up or anything. Next, I'll add the 2-inch inserts that I'll use as feet. They ended up being a really tight fit, so I really had to hammer them into place. Once I have all the feet in place, I can thread in the 1/2" bolts that I'm using. The center bolts I'm going to screw in a little bit more, so I'll make it easier to level when everything's in place. Now I can just flip the whole piece around. Next is one of the more challenging things is getting the 250-pound tool chest in place. The tool chests I'm using are 44-inch Husky tool chests from Home Depot. After a little maneuvering, I finally got it in place. I don't think these tool chests will probably go anywhere, but I'm going to weld on some little tabs for supports just in case. I can now drill holes into the supports and then add little bolts to hold everything in place. Lock washer and nut should hold it nice and secure. I'm using 3 support tabs for each tool chest. Next, I can attach the 2 bench sections together. Now that everything's welded up, I can go and finish painting everything. All right, so all the metal work is done. Now this was a pretty big project actually. It took longer than I anticipated, but just welding everything just takes some time. So everything's welded in place. I think it's about 1,000 pounds between the tool chest and the metal right now. So it's a big heavy workbench that isn't going anywhere. So the next step, I'm gonna move on to do the wood shelves and the wood countertop. I'm using 3/4 inch oak boards that I'm kind of gluing all together, and let's start on that. I can start by marking all my areas for the biscuit joints. I also number all the boards to make sure I get them back in the right place. Next, I can make all the biscuit joints. Once I get all the biscuit joints done, I can start gluing everything up and clamping it down. Next, I can start making the 2x4 supports that will hold the shelving in place. These supports are now the perfect thickness, so the shelving will be flush with the metal. Now start cutting the shelving to make sure it fits perfectly in place. I'll just use the jigsaw to cut out the 4 notches in each corner. Unfortunately, the shelving turned out to be a little too big like it was to fit in place, so I have to rip it down with the table saw and put it in one piece at a time. Because of the notched corners, this is why I had to separate into 2 pieces. This joint will not have any biscuits, it'll just be glued. Next, I'll finish the shelving with some semi-gloss Minox polyurethane. Now I can start working on the huge top, which I'm just going to use pocket hole screws. I'm placing screws about every 6 inches, and it turned out to be around 400 screws to do the whole top. I'm clapping it up one step at a time to make sure everything's flush. Now with a little off-camera help, I can flip the piece to its finished side. It really turned out great, and now it just requires some light sanding. I'll start with some 120 sand grit and finish with 220. And once again, I'll finish it off with some semi-clear polyurethane. And here's the finished result. The last step of the project will be just securing the wood top to the metal base. So here's the final workbench. Thrilled with how it turned out. It's one of those things where it's almost too nice to use right away. I know that will fade quickly, but yeah, I just kind of want to keep it nice for a few days before I start scratching it all up. If you have any questions on this project, I always leave them in the comment section below. If you know anyone that might like this video, please share it. That really helps YouTube, help my channel grow when you share videos like that. So encourage you to do that. And as always, please subscribe. Thanks.